I've now got out my mixer and we'll be about to add the dry ingredients. I want to say something about that. You could do the blending using any number of tools. You could use a mixer, you could use a handheld blender, mixer, whatever they call it, and you could use a regular blender. We've got a mighty one over there called a Vitamix. I think that one's going to be too hard to clean out afterwards. I think a regular blender is harder to clean out, and my double boiler is robust enough that I will just add the dry ingredients to that and blend it right there on the stove. Now you can see all of that is melted.
Do you want to say something about you've tried carob in the past? And
oh yes, thank you for that reminder. I have in the past had some trouble with getting the powder to blend, and I've used a mixture of carob and cocoa powder. And I'm not sure whether it's the cocoa powder or the carob that hasn't been mixing properly. I think it was probably the carob powder. And I've used that all up, and I'm not using it anymore because it's too high in carbs from my point of view, from the point of view of my current objectives. And therefore, I'm going to be using nothing but cocoa powder. And I probably won't also do. And I will probably start with about a cup. So here I go back to a volumetric measurement of cocoa powder. And then I'll be doing some tasting to see what I think it needs more of.
one time you put salt in?
Yes, that was it was more than one time. I used to put salt in regularly and fairly, very small amounts, like in this volume of chocolate, maybe a quarter of a teaspoon. And the last time I did that, it was very odd, but the longer that chocolate sat around, the saltier it got. So.
And the saltier it got, the less we wanted to eat it, so the longer it sat around.
Yes, exactly. So I'm just going to, this can all just get dumped in fact, and then I will give it a bit of a stir, and then I will start using the mixer. Okay, I'm going to put the lohan in first, because that's the most forgiving. It's not as concentrated as the stevia. So I'm going to put a good, this is actually a half tablespoon, so that's a teaspoon and a half. Put that in like that to start with, and then I want 1/8 of a teaspoon of stevia. And then the only way to do this from here on out is to taste it. Okay, so that's 1/8 of a teaspoon of stevia. And I think I just got these measuring spoons with all these tiny little bits. So I think I've used 1/4 of a teaspoon in the past, but not filled it up. So this seems to be mixing really well. It's very runny, very, very runny. It can make a big mess if you're not careful. I'm just going to scrape down the sides of the pan. So now I can taste this and see what it might need more of.
How do you decide that it has enough stevia or that it could use more?
Stevia you have to be careful with, because you can put in too much, and the result of that isn't just too sweet. Too much stevia can start to taste quite bitter. So I try to start on the very scant side with the stevia. Something I realized I didn't do, but is worth mentioning because it's a really handy trick. And you'll see that I was saying this is very runny, so it spatters. I don't know if you can see, but I've got chocolate spattered all over the mixer. And what I usually do is take a piece of wax paper, tear a slice in it, and I fit the slice around the beaters. And then it's the wax paper that gets splattered, and not me, my clothes, and the rest of the kitchen, and the mixer. I think add this, say, a quarter of a cup at a time. Because I like a rich dark chocolate, and I should have said at the very beginning, this is dark chocolate. It is not milk chocolate. It is the real deal. Okay, let's have another taste. And I have not added the orange as yet because I don't want, we're relying on the flavors in the volatiles in the orange extract. And I don't want that all to evaporate in the heat that's in here. So I would always add vanilla or orange. I think both more chocolate, and maybe I'm going to add a bit more Lohan. Lohan by itself has a kind of, it's sweet and has a kind of caramelly taste, which goes very well with chocolate. And in fact is unnoticeable in the chocolate itself. Doesn't taste as good as the last batch yet. Okay, so we'll venture a little bit more stevia.
I have to say this stevia thing is very much a question of taste. I personally don't get the too much makes it bitter thing.
Yeah, I should also point out that I long ago turned off the heat here on the stove. It's just sitting here, it's just serving as a work surface. The chocolate on its own is very bitter, so it does definitely need sweetening. There's a temptation, I realize I'm feeling it at the moment, because it's so runny, to feel like I ought to add more chocolate or more cocoa powder, and I think that's generally a mistake. So what I'm going to do right now is add more Lohan. So it's had a good 2 teaspoons of Lohan, and I'm going to put in another about the same, because it's the safer of the two. And I think this is probably going to do it. Oh, I think that's right, probably. God, I keep wanting to add more chocolate though. Does that feel chocolatey enough to you?
No, it's a bit thin.
Yeah, that's what I think. So here we're, I've given you some measurements, and this is when it's going to get very frustrating because I'm throwing those measurements completely off by continuing to add more stuff. Where'd that go?
How many times have you made chocolate so far?
Oh, I don't know. Probably, gosh, lost count. I've been making it for what, about a year? So I've now put in 1.5 cups of cocoa powder. The oils have stayed the same, so about 1 cup of coconut oil, and anyway, each of them was about 4 ounces of each of the oils, of the fats, the coconut oil and the cocoa butter, and now it's got 1.5 cups of cocoa powder in it.
So all the time you've been making this, there's never been a batch that we wanted to throw out because it was inedible.
That's true, indeed.
The salty one was a bit weird.
The salty one was a bit weird. Oh, I think that's getting chocolatey enough, getting towards chocolatey enough. Have a taste. I think that's very nearly there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think that's a place to stop and add the orange and put it in the freezer and see what it tastes like?
Yeah.
Okie doke. All right, here comes the orange flavoring.
And viewers need to understand that we are an American woman and a British man who live sometimes in England and sometimes in Florida. So when we say home, you need to understand that we could be confused. Home, we could be talking about home in England or home in Florida.
Yes, we could. Okay, I don't see the teaspoon at the moment, so I'll use the half teaspoon and add. So I'm going to put in a teaspoon of orange flavoring. And I'm usually generous with this stuff. I'll give it a stir and adjust that as needed. To taste, always to taste. I mean, if I'm just using vanilla, then I'll put in lots, like 2 teaspoons, 3 teaspoons. Oh, I think that's good. Okay, so that's a teaspoon of orange flavoring. You can see how runny it is. And I would certainly not want to try to pour into those molds out of this pan. If you don't have molds, and I haven't until now, for the past year and however long, what you can do is take something like a baking tray that's got a lip all the way around the edge, and then I would line that with parchment paper.
Greaseproof paper for English people.
Yeah, and this tray, which gives you some spill room, I would line with parchment paper or greaseproof paper, and it happens to be just the right width to fit in here. I've made a couple of freezer things level here, so I can just slide it in there and it will be level.
And we can't tell you how important level is.
Oh God, it is.
Just let it say it takes an awful long time to clean out molten chocolate that's dripped down the back of the fridge.
Yeah, that's for sure. And here goes. Oh yes, it would be quite impossible to do this without this little pouring pitcher, which is what it calls itself on Amazon. Even with it, I'm dripping. So there's our first little candy mold, chocolate mold, filled up, and I will now stick it in the fridge, in the freezer, in fact, and it'll be a couple of hours probably before that's solid enough to pop out. Well, pop out in theory, and we shall see how it works. Okay, well, we've come up with another way to use this larger mold. I'm only filling these, I'm not filling these all the way because I know that this is just an awful lot of chocolate to have at once, even though it's wonderful.